I am joined by Yaneev Forman, who is a co-op student and a volunteer with the Toronto Environment Alliance. He's here to talk about some of the work he's doing at the Toronto Environmental Alliance and other ways that young people can get involved and help make their community better. So it is a real treat to have him here this morning. Good morning, Yaneev.
Good morning, Joel.
So, Yaneev, what exactly is your role at T?
Well, I've been at T for, I guess it would be about 2 years now. And I've had a number of different roles at the organization. What I'm working on right now is overseeing the distribution of about 60,000 local food guides across the city of Toronto. Guides containing information about local food in the city, and I'm distributing them to many community organizations, probably about 70 by now. On top of that, I'm doing some outreach work in the community around local food and other environmental issues. I also was supporting T on their public transit campaign related to Toronto's light rail transit plan. And before that, I joined the organization actually as the Youth Caucus Coordinator. And my responsibility then was to bring youth into the organization. So, it's been a great 2 years.
That is an incredible list of things that you've accomplished in 2 short years. What drew you to T originally? Why choose to spend your volunteer hours at T as opposed to with any other project or organization?
The number one thing about T for me is, I suppose, the freedom that you have as a volunteer to really be involved on the project you're working on the issue that you're trying to affect, and not in a superficial way. It's a small organization, and when you're a volunteer, you really feel like you're making a contribution, you're making a tangible contribution, and especially when I was at the Youth Caucus, you're really in control of the project you're working on. You get to see the results based on what you put in.
How were you able to engage other youth, and are you satisfied with the kind of youth engagement that you have at T? And what would you say to other young people out there who are thinking about getting involved?
Well, you raise a number of points there. So first of all, the first thing we did when we came in to the Youth Caucus, it was myself and a colleague, was we had to figure out how are we going to announce ourselves. That wasn't a particularly difficult task. We created pamphlets, information, we distributed them to libraries, we directed people to come back to a website, fill out a form, and people began signing up very quickly. And what always happens when you have a large number of people sign up to volunteer, is that it boils down to a core group. You have a large number of people who are interested, who want to be involved, who want to find out information, and you keep them in the loop, you send them information, and you have a small number who become very active. And you work with those people, and you really make them feel like their contribution is valued so that they want to come back to the organization and continue to work with you. What I would say to other youth who are thinking of getting involved is that certainly when I was working with the Youth Caucus, a lot of the environmental focus in schools, which is where the Youth Caucus was working, was on raising awareness. Raising awareness about environmental issues is very important, no question. But I think it's also important that youth are aware, at a political level, of where candidates stand on environmental issues, the sort of environmental policies their government is pursuing, and so that, as they would talk to their family and friends about reducing paper usage, reducing garbage usage, they also talk to them about, the positions, the stands of candidates on environmental issues. It's not a partisan thing. It's about finding out how candidates stand and raising awareness about that alongside of the issues themselves.
And that's going to be increasingly important, obviously, as we head into a provincial election coming up this fall. Yaneev, not obviously as a spokesperson for T, I'm not asking you to do that, but in your personal opinion, what are the key issues facing the city of Toronto right now? And you talked about that political engagement. So on a political level, where do you see the key environmental challenges facing Toronto, whether that be in the domain of the municipal government or the provincial government? But what issues for you are the biggest challenges we face where we could make the best improvement to help the environment and improve our quality of life here in Toronto?
Number one, hands down, without any question, is public transit. Toronto needs to improve our public transit network. There is no question, and no one disputes that. Right, left, center, everyone agrees. Public transit is a complicated issue, there's no question. It's a partnership between all three levels of government, or at least it should be. And, a while back, a report came out called The Three Cities Within Toronto, I believe, and it highlighted the income polarization in Toronto. Now, this relates to public transit in a pretty significant way, and it helps me to explain why public transit is such an important issue. The map they did a map showing, concentrations of income polarization in Toronto, poorer areas, etc. And it showed that as you radiate out from the center of Toronto, further northwest, further northeast, you find increased income polarization. And associated with that, connected with that, is lack of access to public transportation. As late as, I guess, 2010, the City of Toronto had a plan, Transit City Rapid Transit Light Rail Plan. And if you put that light rail transit plan map on the map of the City of Toronto, you see that it connects all these different neighborhoods where you find increased income polarization. So building transit in Toronto is an important way of combating poverty, connecting people with jobs, connecting people with areas where they can find employment. Two other ways to look at it, aside from the obvious environmental benefits, getting people out of their cars, reducing gridlock. What just came to mind, our Premier Dalton McGuinty likes to talk about it in terms of allowing people to spend time with their families. When you have better public transit, you spend more time with your family. It's an issue that way. Metrolinx, the provincial agency overseeing transit development in Toronto, in their Big Move report says that we're losing, I think about $5 billion a year in productivity to gridlock. Another reason why we need public transit. And then there's smog and air pollution and climate change. So there's no question that that is the most important issue, in my opinion.
Thank you so much. If you're out there listening, particularly if you're another high school student, the studio phone number is 416-595-1655. If you have a question for my guest, please feel free to call in, 416-595-1655. Let's go back to some of the projects you said you were working on directly. You were working on getting food guides out. How's that going? And what's the objective there? Why is that an environmental priority?
Distributing the food guides is going really, really well. Not yesterday, must have been 2 days ago, I delivered 11,000 to Toronto Children's Services. They're going to be sending them out to their facilities. What the guides are, they were quite an interesting project the T undertook a few years ago. They're called locally grown cultural food guides. T and based on my understanding of the process that the organization undertook, was something along the lines of this. They found that the environmental movement and Toronto's diverse community, there was a bit of a rift between those two things in terms of the success of the environment movement in engaging Toronto's large and diverse population. And they thought one of the ways we could be more successful at engaging Toronto's ethnic community, etc., was by producing some guides about where people can find locally grown food, so food that's been transported from a shorter distance, that is also cultural food. So this resulted in the publication of about 4 different guides: a guide to locally grown South Asian food in Toronto, locally grown African Caribbean food in Toronto, locally grown Middle Eastern food in Toronto, and locally grown Chinese food available in Toronto. And I think that this was an important step in, as I said before, bridging the gap that some people had felt was existing between Toronto's large and diverse population and the environment movement. So then the task became, obviously, how are we going to get these guides out to the community? And that's where I came in. My responsibility was to get them out to community organizations, deliver them to city facilities, etc.
Absolutely, of course. The guide doesn't do any good on the shelf. You have to get it out, and it sounds like you've been doing incredible work to spread the guide around the city. And you raised an important point there that we often don't think about, but that is the distance our food travels before it finds itself at the supermarket or the store or the farmer's market, and the carbon footprint of not only the production of food but the shipping of food, which is a major issue. Turning again to youth involvement, and hopefully we have some young people out there listening, and I think it's so important that people get involved, begin to work at some of these issues that are so important, particularly the energy and the perspective that comes from young people. If there are other high school students like yourself out there listening who want to get involved and they say, I don't know how to do it, where should, first, if they want to get involved with T, where do they go?
Very easy. TorontoEnvironment.org. TorontoEnvironment.org is our website. You can sign up to volunteer. It's very easy, and our volunteer coordinator will get in touch with you. We'll find out how you want to be involved, how we can get you involved. You can also email our volunteer coordinator directly, and that is, I guess the most appropriate email address would be the organization itself, and that's through a form right on the website, and that will go straight to the appropriate person. And there are many, many, many different opportunities for volunteers that we have at the organization, and the staff will work with you to find out which one you want to be involved in. TorontoEnvironment.org.
TorontoEnvironment.org. And it certainly sounds like your experience has been one that you're not just asked, to do the grunt work, although there's obviously some of that, but that you were asked to do some planning and some organizing, and you're deeply involved with the organization, which I find very exciting.
Absolutely. Well, it's part of, as I said before, it's the nature of a small organization. You're in a you're in our suite at 30 Duncan Street, and there's the executive director, there's all the campaigners, there's you, there's the volunteer staff, and everyone's in a room together, exchanging ideas, exchanging resources, and you can go up and talk to anyone and find out incredible information about what's going on right now in the city of Toronto on environmental issues, and you can really see environmental work unfold right in front of you.
To turn back, and I know you're not here as a spokesperson for the Toronto Environmental Alliance, but garbage privatization, the vote just went ahead, and I know that T was actually opposed to the privatization of garbage collection. Why is that? Why? What were T's concerns coming from an environmental perspective?
Yeah, so based on my understanding of the organization's position as a volunteer, based on what I've seen, T's concern was number one about waste diversion. And the issue was really, we want to see the facts laid out in front of us before we decide whether or not privatization is good or bad. The number one issue with respect to having the facts laid out in front of the citizens of the city of Toronto was ensuring that council had oversight at every turn. And that meant council be allowed to see the details of the contracts, to ask and find out how it's going to affect waste diversion, and not have it be done behind closed doors, however, whatever that may consist in. So what we were slightly concerned about, and I think this was a concern that was shared by many people, some at T, some outside of T, some city councillors, was that if we delegate the responsibility of waste collection to a private company entirely, it may have a negative effect on waste diversion. It may mean that some of those incredible achievements we've made over the past number of years, green bin number one, is going to be negatively affected. And that's certainly not something anyone wants to see happen.
Now, I suspect a large part of T's objection will be satisfied by Councillor Matlow's amendment that he offered that was successfully passed, and that is that any privatized collection will have to meet the same diversion targets as the public collection. And in fact, if public collection targets go higher, then the private contract diversion collection targets will also have to rise, which is very important because in a lot of other cities, they have found their diversion rates dropped with private collection. It may have been a result of a bad contract language or a number of other things, but that's certainly the waste diversion is a key issue that I know T has raised. They've also raised the what's called put or pay clauses that have been sometimes written into these contracts where, in fact, if the amount of garbage being collected drops, the city is still on the hook for what was the estimated original amount of garbage, something certainly to be avoided. And lastly, as I was looking at your website and the report, a very important point T has raised is that it appears from other cities' experiences that about 20% of the cost of the contract needs to go into monitoring to make sure those diversion targets are being met, to make sure the city is receiving the services it's paid for. And that monitoring fee doesn't seem to have been factored in when the estimates as to the savings that might be available out there were calculated. So it's certainly something we're going to have to keep our eyes on. In the minute or 2 minutes we have left, I'd love you to tell us, as we look ahead to the provincial election, the city elections are behind us, but as we look ahead to the provincial elections, what are you personally hoping to hear from your candidates as they try to win your vote? You've told us people should be involved, and I agree with you 100%. I'd love to hear from you. What key issues are on the top of your mind at the provincial level?
I mean, I don't think you can say public transit too many times, certainly not in Toronto. I'm going to be looking to make sure my provincial candidates support investment in Toronto's public transit network, support a light rail transit plan that reaches all across the city, and, are genuinely concerned about the environment and about ensuring the progress that the city has made over the past number of years does not fall at the wayside.
Thank you so much for being with us this morning, Yaneev. It's been wonderful talking with you. And again, for our listeners out there, the website was torontoenvironment.org. I really encourage you to get involved. If this isn't the project for you, find another project, but it's a worthy organization, T. They do a lot of good work. To the young people out there listening, or to the older people out there listening, get involved. It's so important. And as my guest has said again and again, transit, let's make sure that we have a transit system in this city that's going to take us forward into the next 100 years. Thank you so much for being with me.
Thank you so much for having me on.